On the 8th of this month, we celebrated the anniversary of the birth of one of the two founders of the theoretic of basically of evolutionary biology. His name was Alfred Russel Wallace, and he is the least known but not least important of the founders of natural selection, or evolution, in fact. Natural History Museum, I think it's the Natural History Museum of the UK, published an article to celebrate him on his date, his anniversary of his birth, and I will share it. I hope this time it shares. The last time I was having problems when I did that. Okay. I should be sharing. Let me just check. Yes, I'm sharing. Hello, John. How are you? It's a little bit out of not quite archaeology, but it does have to do a lot with archaeology because Alfred Russel Wallace was an anthropologist. He studied and a biologist. He was a many-faceted man. He was an explorer, collector, naturalist, geographer, and later on he became a political commentator. And he, by himself, working in the Malay Peninsula, Malaysia, what is now Malaysia and Indonesia, those areas, he, by himself, also developed evolution by natural selection, but his was slightly different from Darwin's. He was quite a sad person. I mean, I don't mean an unlucky person, because his first job as a biologist, explorer, naturalist, etc., was when he went over to the Amazon basin, Amazon forest, etc., and with a buddy, a mate of his, Henry Walter Bates, and they collected a lot of samples, because that's how they financed his work. In the mid to late 19th century, there was a keen interest in Europe of anything that was exotic, and especially in museums were paying huge amounts of money to get not just museums, but also laboratories, universities, etc., huge amounts of money to people who would get them samples of exotic animals, etc., stuff that was exotic. And Henry Walter Bates basically introduced him to methods and delights of collecting beetles, for example. And so they went off to Amazonia, and they split up. In 1948, they landed in Brazil. At that time, it was still a Portuguese colony. Became independent I think it became independent sometimes after. I'm not sure, but that's not important. That's just sidetracking. So they explored the area, and they split up, and they spent 4 years, basically spent 4 years collecting. But on his way back, his luck again was basically, he had bad luck. The ship caught fire and burnt all his stuff, all his samples that he had, his field notes. He was saved, as with the passengers, but he lost. But that didn't let him. He didn't give up, as you shouldn't. Hey, Saki, my friend. So he set off again to the East Asia, and after a year. So here's the article from the Natural History Museum. Some of the birds he collected. I think he sent these enough that they weren't. That some of them weren't destroyed, probably because he sent them earlier. the ship where he was coming back to England, that all the stuff that he had on that ship, he was destroyed, because or else we wouldn't have these samples, obviously. And these are Pipra mannequins, some birds. Excuse me. He also some other. Yeah, he also saved some books, so he managed 2 of his drawings to some 2 books. So before the ship caught fire. So he went off to Malaysia, and he spent there from 1954 over 8 years, where he collected an astonishing 125,660 specimens, including more than 5,000 specimens new to Western science. He noticed then it was there that he noticed a striking distribution of animals around the archipelago, and we call that line now the Wallace Line. It's basically in the areas that this map demonstrated from Celebes, Lombok, this area that's in yellow, the one area. The mammals are not. There are no primates, monkeys. First off, the animals there were a lot of marsupials, and basically those, and the lizards and some of them are slightly, but primarily with the mammals, especially difference between there is more placental mammals in the red area to the west of the Wallace Line than there is to the east. So he noticed that, and we give that name, that boundary today, the Wallace Line. And he found that was interesting, because there is a striking difference. I don't really understand why, but it has to do with the waters there, which are very treacherous, and some animals just couldn't traverse that boundary. So possibly. Then when he after he spent his 8 years there, he saw that, and that's where he's developed his his theory of his hypothesis of evolution, because it's still a hypothesis then. It wasn't tested, but he was testing it, and he noticed that animals evolved through natural selection, but his natural selection was slightly different from Darwin's, where Darwin basically said it was a competition between the species of individual species, between them for a mating pressure that allowed them to. Darwin was more into the sexual selection of the theory of evolution, but Wallace saw the environment as one of the greater factors. And he noticed that it was the environment that the individual animals, etc., had to overcome in order to breed and to have offsprings in order to continue the line. And we know from now that it's both. There is impact from the environment, and impact from prey, and impact from sexual selection. There's the three. Yeah, they both noticed that the predator selection was there. The weaker animal that got eaten could not reproduce, etc. They noticed that. But Darwin saw more pressure in the sexual selection, and Wallace saw more pressure in the environment. And they were both right, because it's the three together. So, yes. So he came back. He wrote a letter, because he was in when he developed his theory, his hypothesis, I should say. He was sick because of malaria, so he was corresponding to Darwin, and it would take about 3 months or 4 for the letters to get from the Malay Peninsula, from Indonesia, etc., from this area, southeastern Asia, to England. So it was a hell of a lag. It's not like the lag you guys get now that in the internet, where you're waiting for the mobile phone or whatever to refresh the page. That lag was months, and so when he wrote to Darwin, and then Darwin saw, yep, this guy is also getting the idea I should publish. So he published. He mentioned Wallace because Wallace came back to the UK and to the United Kingdom, and he became one of Darwin's most fierce defenders. The other one was, let me see if I can find it. Was Thomas Henry Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog, and he had the famous. Thomas Huxley had a famous debate with the Archbishop of Canterbury, where they debated each other, and the newspapers at the time published Huxley as a British bulldog. That drew him, trying to denigrate him, and they also drew Darwin as a monkey on a tree to trying to discredit him. But that came later with on the origin of the species and when he talked about our human evolution. Yeah, that's when that happened. So Alfred Russel Wallace then came back to the UK. He was fine. He knew, he understood that there was as it says here, one day in 1958, he was feverish from malaria, and he confined to his hut in the islands of Tenerife, now in Indonesia. Wallace saw that natural selection, basically what national selection. Some of the beetles he collected, because he collected a lot of beetles. So he wrote to him again, and Darwin had been working for 20 years on the same theory. So Darwin published his origins of the species, which came out in 1859, and that's Charles Darwin, by the way. And he was Wallace was okay that Charles Darwin got all the credit, and it was not until much later that they began to attribute as much credit to Wallace as Darwin. But there's also have been some campaigns to discredit Darwin, and by saying that Darwin, or conspiracy theories, saying that Darwin basically took Wallace's ideas and made them his own. But we know that there is no evidence of that, because Wallace was not an idiot. He was a very, very intelligent person, and in the end, he would have noticed, because he read the Darwin's books, he would have noticed there was any form of collusion or anything to do that to him. He would have noticed it, and he was fine with it. There was disagreement between Darwin and Wallace, because Wallace was a spiritualist. Darwin was also a slight religious man in his early years, and we really don't have any evidence that he didn't maintain that, or maintained with. It's very enigmatic, but Wallace didn't hide it. Wallace, especially when talking about human evolution, he thought there was a divine spark or some interference there. So it's sort of like a creationist thing. He couldn't fathom that we were so we being so unique, we could not have evolved. We could have evolved from less complex organisms, etc. He couldn't see that, Wallace, but there was no animosity between them, because Wallace could not keep, later on when he was in England, he got married, of course, and I think he had children. I'm not sure. That's not important. But he could not keep a steady salaried job. But Darwin did campaign for Wallace to receive a pension. So this sort of, to me, is the evidence that there was no animosity. There are people that are selfless, who see the scientific discoveries for the scientific discoveries, not for their aggrandization. And Darwin was got got most of the credit, but Wallace was okay. He knew that he participated in something brilliant, something changing, something huge, and I admired Wallace slightly more than Darwin. Maybe because I lived on the eastern side of the Wallace Line when I was in Australia, and that's where I grew up and studied. But yeah, Darwin was a brilliant scientist, but to me, Wallace is always slightly a better person, I might say. He was selfless. I don't think if the roles were reversed, I don't think Darwin would have been so happy. And but that's speculation. And two brilliant minds of the 19th century, three if you include Thomas Henry Huxley and a few others. They were my inspiration for becoming an archaeologist and for loving science. And they didn't make me an atheist, by the way. That came through other means. I read the Bible. That's how I became an atheist. So yeah, I think I will end it here. This time, yes, I got my screen sharing working. So just stop screen sharing. See who's in the chat. Say hello, John. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to stop in a second or two. He was acknowledged to be an atheist. He was an atheist. There was no real indication that he was religious in any way, shape, or form in his later life. In his early and midlife, yes, he was somewhat the normal, like going to church once or twice. He got married in church, stuff like that. His wife was religious, by the way. So, but yeah, but no, he wasn't. I think he was an atheist. But it's a 19th century type of atheist, by the way. It's not like an anti-theist that we have now. He didn't care about religion, basically. So sort of like what I do. I'm fine with all the religious things going on. Oh, well, not all religious things that go on. There are, of course. I'm not a cultural relativist. But Darwin, yeah, Darwin was an atheist. But as his deep religious wife, he was okay. He did criticize Wallace, but he was not antagonistic to him because of Wallace's obvious religious beliefs, his spiritualism. So yeah. Oh yeah, when did he start? Yeah, well, basically started when Florida sort of became a thing. Yeah, but now it started in Florida, but it's spread to lots of other places on Earth, in Russia, America, everywhere. So yeah. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. It's always a pleasure to have you guys, and catch you guys next time. Who knows? See you.